Alright, the next thing, we're going to give you some tips and tricks on techniques to use. Now, when you're doing root collar excavations with air tools, it's a little bit simpler because you go to the base of the tree, you trace out where the flare transitions from anchor roots into your secondary roots. At that point, you have sinuses in between the major anchors, but you also have an amount of dirt that's going to be piled up on the outside of the quote-unquote moat that you're going to create. This also is going to make it easier to do watering, biostimulant application, and granular feeding. But you have to be sure that when you create that moat, that it can collect water, number one, but won't fill back in. It's a very, very important part of completing a root collar excavation. A lot of times you've got a swing man that's going to come back through, knock down the high points of the moat from the dirt that you've blasted, depending on how deep the tree is covered and smothered. The second technique that we're going to talk about is exactly how far out you have to do an excavation. If you've got volcano mulched or something that's severely covered and smothered, you're going to have to take your moat out an extra 6 to 8 inches. In certain scenarios where you have newly constructed houses, you're going to have an excess amount of red dirt that you're going to have to displace and move before you complete your excavation. Now, that just means that you've got a couple of extra passes and that the proximity at which you put the nozzle close to the ground is going to be very effective at moving the dirt around. So, a lot of times this is going to come from practice, but we're going to let you know what we've found in the last 10 years. These are the best management practices for doing root collar excavations on all size trees. And we're talking newly planted, balled and burlap, covered and smothered, trees that were installed improperly up to large native hardwoods that could have in excess of 12 to 16 inches of covered and smothered root collars. The next thing that we're going to discuss is ergonomics, which translates into body positioning. Now, for a tall guy like myself, I can tuck this gun under my arm with no problem. With a smaller model, it's not that big a deal, but with a big gun, you have an excessive amount of air passing through the gun. Number one, it's going to get hot. One thing that you have to take into consideration, especially if you have hoses laying across somebody's beautiful grass, or that if you're running the gun for any length of time over about 45 minutes or an hour, it's going to create heat. You wouldn't believe that air moving through a tube would create as much heat, but the friction of all of that air volume moving at 1,200 miles per hour creates an excessive amount of heat. We have a supercooler on our compressor because of all of the heat generated. You also have to take into account body positioning. You can hold the gun like this. A lot of times I hold it and brace it against my shoulder like this, but depending on your body size and your body mass is really going to tell you how easily you're going to hold the gun. A lot of times when you're using the larger model, you're going to have an extreme amount of blowback, which means when you open the plunger and release the air through the nozzle, it's going to kick this way, so you're going to have to lean into it and be sure that you brace yourself. Conversely, when you let off, close the air, you have to be sure and catch it because it's going to release an excessive amount of pressure all of a sudden. So you don't want to be caught off guard. It'll cause you to stumble. I know you're going to feel a little bit ridiculous when you first start using the gun, but it's real easy to get used to. It doesn't take a lot of strength to manage an air tool, but you do have to hang on. You have to put two hands on the gun. This is not a one-handed operation. And so therefore we've added padding on the shoulder, padding on the handle, and that makes it absolutely essential for your operator to be comfortable, especially after doing a whole day of root collars.
This is a root collar that one of the first things that we do for a continuing tree protection action is we remove these rocks. And a lot of people say, wow, they're decorative, but they gather and store heat. And roots like this grow in cool, moist conditions. And anytime we've got heat and the kind of dry conditions that you see here, it's not going to be very conducive for these roots. As you can see, they're growing up around into the collar. We want to stimulate these to go out, remove these rocks and wet this area down, and it will work great. Trust us, this works good.
What we've done is we've taken our 185 gun, which we call our small gun, and we've done a preliminary excavation. We found that we've got approximately 10 to 12 inches of excess topsoil that's been built up around this collar. And also, you can see it's been here for a while because I have varying levels of trash, rock, and encircling roots that have started to inhabit this entire area of the collar, which I'm going to have to convert over to the large gun, which is twice our 185. It's about 375 CFMs. And I'm going to make very quick work of this whole mound of soil right here. And I'm going to have to excavate out far enough to make sure that this entire collar is uncovered so that when I leave this site, this tree is in better shape than when I showed up. Alright, we've just about completed our excavation, but as you can see, there is a massive amount of secondary roots that have grown up around this collar area. We've already got some malformation of the major anchors, and that we've got this incredible mass here. But if you look at this, it's just not doing anything to this tree except for increasing the likelihood that the collar is going to be strangled. So what we're going to have to do is do a fair amount of root pruning so that way this collar area is 100% exposed to water, air, nutrients, and then we can add energy in the form of biostimulant and, of course, Mother Nature. You'll be very impressed at all the stuff that you find buried in these collars. For years and years, people have used trees as natural trash collection areas. A lot of people use them to collect a lot of their natural recycled materials, such as rocks and bricks. And as you can see, they were shooing horses here.
Long, long ago in a galaxy far, far away.
Now we get to finish our excavation. Alright, what we're going to do now is a root collar excavation in real time. A little bit of a smaller tree, and so this is going to be a real good example of how quick and efficient doing root collars with the big gun is. Are you rolling? Alright, there we have an exposed root collar. We found where the exact flares are, where it actually begins to extend out into its natural feeding zone, the critical root zone. There's very little amount of root pruning that needs to be done. We've got competing briars and natural native trees that are inhabiting this area, but as you can see, this root collar is good as is and ready to be watered.